Matthew 5 through 7. We hear again, like we saw in yesterday's reading from Luke 6, the kinds of things Jesus would have been saying again and again in many different places. I also think that what you're hearing in these readings today are the kinds of things that would have caused the greatest stir among his opponents and the greatest loyalty among those who liked what they heard. And so, again, let's think of both the negative and the positive. The negative reaction to Jesus' words of the Sermon on the Mount are coming from, remember, we've come through 400 years of rejection of Yahweh. So we have to realize that, and I think this is the only way to understand Jesus in context, he is not talking to people in general who understand or follow the God of Israel. They've had 400 years of political upheaval, the Roman pantheon of gods, the Greek god Asclepion, we noticed in John 5, has a healing pool just outside of the temple in Jerusalem. In other words, it's much more common, I think, if we had lived there at the time of Jesus, to see people worshiping actively other gods than Yahweh, even though they're Jewish. So Jesus is coming into that kind of a hotbed or a competitive issue of worship. And in that sense, many of Jesus' words about Yahweh will fall upon very not just deaf ears, but rebellious ears as well. On the positive side, let's remember that an Anna, a Simeon, a Zacharias, and Elizabeth, there will be many people, well, maybe many is too many, but there will be a remnant of those who hear Jesus and say, that's the God I love and want to worship. Thank you for bringing Yahweh back into our daily conversation. And they would go back to their villages and homes and tell their family and friends, we have met the prophet. We have met the one who is going to bring Israel back to Yahweh, and thus fulfill those promises of Jeremiah 31, Ezekiel 36, and the new covenant concept of the Old Testament. So let's talk about the sermon again, some of the things that we read in Matthew 5 through 7 that are very instructive. I think we have at this point in our story not saving this, not turning back. Sometimes it's said that, like at the triumphal entry or things like that, that Jesus makes this great, don't turn back, or there is no turning back now in our ministry. I think this sermon here is where Jesus, and I know it's early, but this is where Jesus says, you're either with me or against me, because what I'm telling you is how to worship Yahweh. And so we are introducing the means of coming back to Yahweh and not making a deal, as it were. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they deal with the spiritual world, they're interested in making a deal with heaven and saying, if you give me blessings, I'll give you worship. And Jesus is trying to correct that whole misunderstanding when it comes to Yahweh. Don't forget that Jesus is, again, in this sermon, or these things that he's saying, he's very, very Jewish. In other words, we are constantly appealing to the worship of Yahweh. Listen to some of these things he says. 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. 9:8, when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God. 12:50, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven. 15:31, so the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking and the maimed being made whole, and they glorified the God of Israel. So Jesus will be doing and saying things that want people, that intends to bring people not closer just to him, but closer to Yahweh. And in doing so, of course they're going to follow Jesus, but Jesus will always redirect that worship back to Yahweh. Fulfilling the law does not mean obeying the law. I think this is often misunderstood, and the way to know that is through Matthew 5:20. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, and of course they obeyed the law, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. So how do you exceed the rightness or the propriety of the Pharisees? Well, you simply live up to the character of Yahweh, and Jesus is going to call the Pharisees and scribes on the carpet all the time for obeying law but not honoring the God who gave the law. So let's not think that Jesus was trying to get people to act more lawfully. I see him wanting to have people follow Yahweh. It would be 4. It's sometimes thought that Jesus is trying to say that all sins are the same when he says, you've heard it said, don't kill, but I say don't be angry, or you've heard it said, don't commit adultery, but I say don't lust. What he's trying to do there, I think, is not say that all sins are identical. He's trying to correct this crazy idea that all sins can be parsed away. So in other words, you could come right up to the point of killing someone, walk away, and think that you've honored Yahweh. Or the same with adultery, and Jesus is saying, come on, let's be honest. Yahweh doesn't work that way. The sin of lust and adultery are related. The sin of anger and murder are related. So that if you want to honor Yahweh, you're going to nip things in the bud before you get down that path, because God, again, is a God that wants the best for his people, and the best for his people is not living in anger or in lust and so forth. So no, sins are not the same, and Jesus never said they were, but they are certainly related. The Lord's Prayer, what is that talking about? I'd say when you hear it in its form that Jesus gives, in fact in Luke 11:1, the Lord's Prayer is given in response to the disciples saying, teach us to pray like John taught his disciples. I think what you're hearing in the Lord's Prayer is a simple, heartfelt, honest, conversational commitment to Yahweh. That would have been, again, so different from how people treated the gods of the Greek and Roman pantheon. In my weakness, I'm committed to you. That's how I hear things like, forgive us our sins as we forgive others, or give us this day our daily bread. Those are words of individual heartfelt commitment, and that again would have been so different from the very non-conversational prayers that people gave to the gods of the Romans and Greeks. And then as we close, this two paths idea, you can't help but come to the end of the Sermon on the Mount and hear Jesus say things like, enter at the narrow gate as opposed to the broad one. Be a good tree, not a bad tree. Everyone who says, Lord, Lord, necessarily will not enter the kingdom. There are two ways to build, one on the rock and one on the sand. N.T. Wright, in his Revelation commentary, says this: when God takes his seat in Revelation 4 for the final judgment, this judgment will be in accordance with the totality of the life that each person has lived. That, it seems, is what is written in the books that are being opened during the judgment. We will be justified on the basis of faith alone, and this includes the work of the Spirit as the Spirit produces in the individual Christian that overall tenor of life, which is, to quote Romans 2:7, seeking for glory, honor, and immortality. So we're getting ahead in the story, of course, when we bring in Paul, but I think it's good to say at this point that when we hear Jesus talk about justification, about ultimate salvation, he and Jesus and Paul will agree that justification or salvation deals with the entirety of life lived. For example, as Jesus closes his sermon by saying, the way to honor Yahweh is to build one's life, that's the tenor of one's entire life, upon the rock.